is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. The Jacksonville Symphony and guest vocalist Lemmy Pulliam present Romance in Opera on February 5th, featuring some of the most romantic opera arias, including Puccini's Nessun Dorma, Wagner's Tristan Prelude, and more. Tickets at jacksymphony.org.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, what happens when local elected officials adopt national talking points? We talked to a local reporter about the implications of the municipal MAGA movement. Then, having just clinched her 6th Grammy win last night, jazz singer Samara Joy discusses her meteoric rise to one of the greats of the genre ahead of her performance here on February 15th. And can HOA tensions lead to murder? The author of a new novel explores the politics of the gated community. Join the conversation. Give us a call on air at 904-549-2937 or head to firstcoastconnect.org, where you can find all the ways to connect with us. And you can also sign up for our new daily newsletter, which delivers program information and a sneak peek at upcoming guests to your inbox every day. Stick around. We'll be back right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. A preschooler and his father, who were arrested in Minneapolis and moved to detention in Texas, are now back home. A federal judge ordered their release. Officials at the boy's school say federal agents used the boy as bait to lure other adults out of his home. From Minnesota Public Radio, Matt Sepik has more.
Liam Conejo Ramos was photographed wearing a blue hat with bunny ears and a Spider-Man backpack when masked ICE agents pulled him from his dad's car on January 20th after school. Local school officials say agents led the 5-year-old to his front door and directed him to knock to see if anyone else was home. ICE flew the boy and his father, Adrian Conejo Arias, to a Texas detention center. In ordering their release Saturday, Judge Fred Beery called the move a, quote, perfidious lust for unbridled power that's, quote, bereft of human decency. Attorneys say the family from Ecuador is focusing on finding peace. They entered the U.S. legally in 2024 to seek asylum, their lawyers said. For NPR News, I'm Matt Sepik in Minneapolis.
President Trump is sending mixed signals on his plans for Iran. This raises the possibility of either a military strike or negotiation. Meanwhile, Iran's leader is warning a U.S. attack could ignite a wider Mideast war. NPR's Greg Myrie reports.
The U.S. buildup in the region includes an aircraft carrier, multiple additional ships, and dozens of warplanes. President Trump describes the force as an armada and says the strike would be much more forceful than the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities last June. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, spoke Sunday saying, quote, "The Americans should know if they start a war, this time it will be a regional war. Iran was hard hit last summer, but still has missiles capable of striking U.S. and Israeli targets in the region." Trump also says Iran wants a deal to avoid a conflict, but so far, no negotiations have been announced. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
President Trump says this summer he'll close the performing arts venue, the Kennedy Center, in Washington, D.C., for 2 years. NPR's Tamara Keith reports Trump wants to renovate the building.
Trump secured more than $250 million in funding for the work as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Until last night, Trump had never said anything publicly about having to close for construction. The closure is set to start July 4th, pending approval from the board. In terms of what will be done, Trump has said it needs a new roof and new air conditioning. He called it a revitalization and complete rebuilding.
NPR's Tamara Keith. There's been a mass exodus of performers and patrons from the Kennedy Center since Trump took it over last year. Trump's also torn down the east wing of the White House to build an enormous ballroom. He also wants to construct a gigantic triumphal arch in Virginia across from the Lincoln Memorial. You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. The first in a new series of town halls with Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan begins tomorrow. The meeting is at 6 p.m. at Raines High School on Raines Avenue. The mayor is hosting this new series of town halls to discuss budget priorities and update citizens on city projects. The next one is at the same time on February 17th at Westside High School on Firestone Road. There are currently 6 more scheduled town halls at locations across the city through March 31st. A proposal that advances the creation of a Florida Museum of Black History in St. Johns County has gotten the support of a second Senate committee. A task force created in 2023 recommended putting the museum on a site west of St. Augustine that formerly housed Florida Memorial University. State Senator Tom Leake's bill would recognize the designation.
I don't think you could tell the story of Florida without also telling the story of Black Floridians. And so what this is going to be like is going to be a museum that celebrates the history of Black Floridians.
A similar bill unanimously passed the state Senate during the 2025 session, but failed in the House. It is a chilly start to the day here in Northeast Florida, and it's going to be a chilly afternoon. Highs will only reach the lower 50s, and it'll be less windy compared to yesterday. Typically, highs are in the mid to upper 60s for this time of year. Freezing conditions are once again expected overnight. Lows will be in the mid to upper 20s inland, and generally temperatures will drop into the lower 30s for areas along the coast.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include FJC, a foundation of donor-advised funds working to maximize the impact of charitable giving and to create customized philanthropic solutions. Learn more at fjc.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, the municipal MAGA movement. We talked to a local investigative reporter about the trickle-down politics of the Trump administration and how it's changing the way Jacksonville leaders govern. Later in the program, 26-year-old jazz vocalist Samara Joy, already recognized as one of the strongest voices in the genre, joins us ahead of her local performance. But first, Trinity Webster Bass is the Tributary's inaugural investigative journalism fellow and a Jacksonville native. Her recent article, which explores how state and local politics are increasingly dictated by what's happening in Washington, was featured this weekend as an episode of the Reveal podcast. She joins us now. Trinity, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So you've been reporting on this for several months now. This article of yours published in the Tributary, now the Florida Trib. It's kind of rebranded a little bit, but it published Saturday and was also, as I said, featured as a episode of Reveal. Well, how did you begin focusing on this? Tell us a little bit about the focus of your reporting and why you started working on this.
Yeah, so this was a part of a local project with Reveal in collaboration with Reveal. And we pitched the story about, what's happening on a national level and how that shows up on a local level. So the main way that we saw that is the fact that we have our own Duval Doge here in Jacksonville. But we also see that happening not only here locally, but on a statewide level. And again, how that showed up on the national level. So about, a year ago, we had the establishment of the National Federal Doge. And, we saw them cut funding, slash funding, federal workers out of work, all of those things, and made really big claims of wanting to cut at least $1 trillion in spending, in government spending. And shortly after that, Florida Doge became a thing, and that was established by Governor Ron DeSantis. And just a month after that, we saw that Duval Doge was established, and that committee kind of doing the same thing as Florida Doge and the federal Doge.
And as you noted in your reporting, the federal Doge hasn't really lived up to its promises. I mean, it had pledged to cut $1 trillion in spending. It has come nowhere near that. And it actually, as you note, disbanded well before its year-long charter to exist, leaving in its wake, a lot of disruption, certainly
Right.
at the federal level. But that has not prevented states, some 26 states, from emulating that model and creating these statewide Doges. Is the Jacksonville level Doge unusual in the scope of that kind of mimicry that we're seeing?
I would say no, it's really not. And there are other initiatives, Doge-like initiatives across the state of Florida, just because they're trying to comply with the government. Florida Doge is coming all across the state saying there's wasteful spending here, millions of dollars worth of wasteful spending here and wasteful spending there. And you'll hear that throughout the piece where Blaise Ngolia, who's the head of Florida Doge, went to Broward County, he went to Hillsborough County, he even went to, of course, Duval, Nassau, recently in Fernandina Beach. And, you know, these local municipalities are establishing their kind of local own Doge initiatives so that they can be in compliance with the government.
And to respond to some extent. And so you talk about Jacksonville's history as a purple city. Tell us a little bit about kind of where Jacksonville was and where it's moving to or what it has become more recently.
Right. So a part of this reporting, I did a ton of interviews of, local politicians, civic leaders, and something that they mentioned to me right off the bat when I would ask them questions is that, Jacksonville didn't used to be like this. This is a new concept in Jacksonville's history. We would have Republicans, we would have Democrats, and we would have different, opinions about how we should run the government, but that didn't stop us from getting the things that needed to be done for the better of Jacksonville, for the residents of Jacksonville. But especially as we've seen this kind of new era of Trump policies, we've seen, just a transfer of people, politicians kind of taking cues from national policies. And one of the big ways that shows up is during the budget meeting where we have Councilman Roy Diamond's amendments, the big, beautiful budget amendments that wanted to prohibit spending on DEI, abortion, care, and immigration.
I want to get to that and, what that big, beautiful budget proposal looked like and how that, created some conflict in the budget process. But when you were talking to these people, these civic leaders, were they upset about this change that they're seeing? What were their reflections on the fact of it when you were saying it used to be like this and now it's like this? Were they celebratory? Were they frustrated?
I think most of them are pretty frustrated with it, especially because when you look at the budget meeting, it lasted nearly 14 hours. And that's not really how budget meetings go. It's supposed to be more of a rudimentary, process in government. We do this because this is the place where we allocate money to the things that need money. It's not about, trying to really make a political stance or pass through legislation that doesn't really have to do with funds and funding, city services. And a lot of civic leaders were saying that it makes, their job more difficult. And honestly, it also affects how they interact with one another. It used to be much more just like a cordial space that you had differences, but that doesn't mean we couldn't get the job done.
And so bring us back to that consequential budget meeting. This was September 24th, ran into September 24th.
Yes.
It started the day before, late after, like 3 o'clock
3
in the
p.m.
afternoon.
Yes.
And remind us what happened.
Right. So at the beginning, you're going through all of these bills that you're having, and eventually the budget meeting just kind of comes to a stalemate. You have community members who are coming up during public comment who are saying, we don't want the property tax cut, the millage rate reduction. We don't want these big, beautiful budget amendments in the budget. And they're coming up and they're expressing, constantly, person after person, what we desire in our city. But as the hours go on, you see that council members aren't really in agreement with what's going on with how constituents feel about what should be in the budget and what shouldn't be in the budget. And as we're hitting the 12-hour mark, the 13-hour mark, council members are saying we need to make a decision here. We know that mostly the Democratic council members do not want this millage cut. Republicans are really vying for this property tax cut, and they eventually changed their vote, saying that we're not going to do these big, beautiful budget amendments, but we will push through this property tax cut.
Remind us what the budget amendments were and why those were unusual for a city budget.
Right. The big, beautiful budget amendments were legislation put forth by Councilman Rory Diamond, basically saying that they wanted to prohibit any spending on DEI, abortion, and immigration. And what was unique about this specific amendments is that it's more about policy and legislation. And typically that doesn't really go in a budget. That goes through things like resolutions or bills or just like ordinances, any other of the many ways that you can push through legislation through the city council. And it's much more of just like a political stance rather than this has to do with where the money and where the funds are going within city services or programs within the city. And that's why a lot of council members were really opposed to it, because it was simply, it doesn't belong in the budget. It doesn't belong here. And that's why, they really just didn't want it in the budget.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the municipal MAGA movement. We are talking to Trinity Webster Bass. She's a reporter for the Tributary about about an article that she published this weekend, and you can join our conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or going to firstcoastconnect.org to find all of the other ways to connect with us. We have a call from Wells on the south side. Good morning, Wells. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Trinity. I wouldn't call this a big, beautiful bill. I would call it a kill budget or a kill bill, because people are going to die from it. What I wanted to say also is that we see the local city council getting involved in national and international issues, which is not their place, but they are doing it to protect the economic structure that exists in this country. And I want to point out one of those things was a resolution that the city council voted on and approved, and it was support to the Zionist government of Israel, and people came out in groves to protest that and to ask the city council to pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire as the genocide was being carried out, and they refused to do that. The other point is we had Charlie Kirk's national Turning Point USA clubs being put in our schools, and that's been forced into some of our high schools here. And one of the backers of that is Rory Diamond, who sits on the city council. And the last point I want to make is our police chief, our sheriff, got training in Israel. And the mayor says she can't control the police, but the city continues to give funds to the police. They continue to raise their budget. So there's a lot of contradictions going on here, and I wanted to point those out to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Wells, for your comments. Trinity, to his point, the Israel resolution was sort of an early example of how this city council, as currently constituted, would be willing to put itself into national or international politics instead of, I guess, staying in its lane as it may have done in previous years in terms of retaining a focus on just strictly local matters.
Yeah, and I think that really comes to the fact that people aren't really paying attention to local politics anymore. People are looking to national outlets to get the news. They're looking more what's happening nationally or globally to kind of be an indicator of how they should feel about politics right now. Mm. And I think that also comes with, just the breakdown of local media and why local media is so important in this time right now. It's important to have a wide variety of places that you get your news from, especially nowadays. You're not going to get everything or the perspective that you're looking for from one news source. And it's really important just to do the same with your local news. If we keep paying attention what's happening nationally, and that goes for constituents, residents, but also civic leaders, we kind of get away from what's happening locally and what really matters to the people here. And to your point, I think leaders are also being forced to take a stance on these national policies as well.
Right. We also have a call from Bill in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Bill. Go ahead.
Good morning. Hi. The topic may have moved on, but I so wish that this naming of things big and beautiful, which I find so childish and inane, and it seems to be spreading out of Washington now into our local area. I hate to hear that being referred to, and I wish hosts, and can't control the guests, but hosts would speak in terms of the budget bill and not attach these modifiers to it, which are so fatuous and silly, I think. So that's my feeling.
Bill, thanks. I appreciate that. I mean, it is the name of the amendments,
Right.
officially. It is part of the official record, but I understand your perspective. So thank you for that. So these tax cuts were part of what they were voting on.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that in many ways was more heavily focused on, or perhaps animated by, this visit that we had from the state CFO, Blaise
Right.
Ngolia, who, as you said, is the head of the Florida Doge. So tell us a little bit about these series of press conferences that he's been having, that he was having, and that he had about a week before the budget vote here in Jacksonville.
Right. So these press conferences, he goes all around the state of Florida and basically pointing out what he calls wasteful and excessive spending within government finances. And anywhere from around $50 million he's called out in, I think it was Hillsborough County, to about $344 million in Palm Beach County. And like you said, a week before the budget meeting, he called out $200 million in wasteful and excessive spending here in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida. But what I found through my reporting is that a lot of these numbers that he was spewing out, they didn't really have much evidence behind them. He would hold up the sign with the number listed on it, but there weren't any spreadsheets, there weren't any charts that kind of explained where this number was actually coming from. And that's exactly what we saw in Jacksonville. And like you said, the property tax cut. So he was saying, Blaise Ngolia, that if we could reduce, property taxes significantly, which is also the aim of DeSantis and his administration, to eliminate property taxes, and we're seeing that legislation go through the legislature right now, governments can start to reduce their government spending.
And so do we know how he chose the cities he was going to? What was driving the locations that he was auditing?
Yeah, it was mostly just major cities. So he went to basically every major municipality. There was Miami, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Palm Beach County.
And it didn't matter if they were run by a Democrat or a Republican?
No, it didn't matter. Oftentimes, of course, most of these places were run by Republican mayors, but you did kind of see definitely a different tone shift when it came to Democratic mayors, especially with our mayor here. He often kind of went at Mayor Deegan for the holograms and saying that was wasteful spending. And that was one of those main things that I saw in our confrontational interview in Winter Park, Florida. He really just kept honing in on these $75,000 holograms that Mayor Deegan put up in the airport.
So typically when there's an audit done, there's this opportunity for the person who's being audited to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Very often they get the audit before it's made public and are usually given a chance to incorporate any changes if they'd like, so that they can kind of come out with a sort of positive face of an audit process. And that's sort of how the city does it. If somebody's being audited, that agency gets a chance to incorporate their own responses, what they're going to do to alleviate or ameliorate the problems that were discovered. In this case, not only were the figures not provided to you in the media, but the city really didn't know where these numbers were coming from. Not just this city, but any city. When Blaise Ngolia would say, I found $50 million, or in this case, $200 million worth of waste, there was no information about where that waste was being discovered.
Right. And all throughout this time, as I was following where he was going through to these different cities, I was making records requests for, any reports, any audits from basically every city that he was going to. Because I personally wanted to know for my reporting, how did he get these numbers, especially here in Duval County? And it really wasn't until literally last week that we kind of got an idea of what he was calling out for wasteful and excessive spending. And Blaise Ngolia, the Florida Agency for Fiscal Responsibility, which is basically kind of in partnership with Florida Doge, they presented this 98-page report to the legislature, and it kind of gave a run through of what they believe was wasteful and excessive spending. But when you really looked at the examples they provided, it wasn't really calculations per se. It was literally examples.
It didn't add up to the $200 million either. In your
Right. It was
reporting.
about $95 million that they laid out as examples for wasteful and excessive spending. But when you really looked at the rationale behind those examples, it wasn't because it was fraudulent or anything like that. It was because, this art program is considered to be DEI. And one of the main portions, a really big figure of $30 million worth of what they called was wasteful and excessive spending, was actually police and fire pensions. And that funding is managed by a company by the name of VPC, and they have a DEI policy on their website. And for that reason, Florida Doge named that $30 million figure worth of police and fire pensions as wasteful.
I want to read a couple of comments that we got. Marty emailed, when elected officials begin parroting partisan rhetoric instead of exercising independent judgment, it signals they are representing a party and its leaders, not the full range of their constituents. Jacksonville residents should be alarmed when hive mind politics replaces truth, guardrails, and basic respect for democratic norms. Jane commented on Facebook, I sat in on several Duval Budget and Finance Committee meetings. The cruelty and lack of respect for not only the mayor, but for each other and their community was evident by their words and behaviors. The so-called MAGA GOP members want attention from the MAGA leadership. It's no wonder that Mr. Diaz resigned from the chairmanship of this committee. Before you comment today, I ask you, did you watch on your local channel the local city council meetings? Until you do, you are not participating. I think that reference must be to somebody else who's commenting in the comments. I don't know if my producers can tell me that. I'm not sure who that was referenced to. We have a call from Mike in St. Augustine. Good morning, Mike. Go ahead.
Good morning. The property tax thing is a mess. The last iteration that I read about was that it would apply only if you owned your home outright and you weren't making payments on it or anything else. That's not going to help many local people. It's going to help the rich people that come over here, the snowbirds that have a second home and things like that. And those property taxes are going to be replaced with higher sales tax and other taxes and fees that they're going to apply wherever they can to get away with it. What should be done is better property assessments. And that's what's not being done. There's 90 acres near me that was bought as a development, and they're paying $3,000 a year in taxes. It's listed as ag, but there's no agriculture activity at all. In fact, the county ran water and sewer lines to the property ahead of the development being cleared and things like that. $3,000 a year for 90 acres where the homes are going to be $1 million homes in there. That's where our property taxes are failing. Thank you.
Mike, thanks for your comments. Trinity, I want to talk more about where this money is going, because you had an exchange with Blaise Ngolia at a press conference in Winter Park where you were trying to get some of these answers. Last Wednesday, as you say, this 98-page report was finally issued. It was 2 weeks beyond the deadline that the Florida Doge was set to report on its findings. But it did finally release this report. But in the interim, you were trying to get that information from Blaise Ngolia, and you had this sort of back and forth with him at this press conference where you were asking about it. And you told him about your own reporting in terms of how much of this money was going to police and fire. Can you tell us, first of all, what your findings were and then what that exchange was like?
Right. So it's fair to mention that Blaise Ngolia doesn't really announce these press conferences early on. So I was actually headed to Tallahassee to go find him and speak to him because we really needed this interview, and our requests had been denied or they just hadn't responded. And early in the morning, I got a notification saying that he would be in Winter Park. So I turned around on I-10 and I was headed back down towards our way to Winter Park, Florida. And to your question about those findings and that interaction during that press conference, something that he also is saying that contributes significantly to excessive spending is city government employees and having more and hiring more employees.
And he sort of said that pace of growth of government employees is far outstrips what should be a natural evolution based on growth. He thinks that we're just doing too much hiring of new employees in terms of relative to the growth of any area.
Right, and relative to the population growth as well of Jacksonville. But when you really look at the numbers, a lot of those employees who are being hired in our city are police and fire. And that's been a priority for both Democrats and Republicans here in the city. And it's also been a priority for Republicans in general, especially Blaise Ngolia, to protect police and fire and to protect the funding that they have. And when I confronted him about that, saying, well, actually, a lot of the people who are hired in our city are police and fire, he basically told me that's absolutely not true. But over the course of since 2019, of the about 600 employees who were hired here in Jacksonville, over 500 of them were police and fire.
And so when you spoke to him, you said, most of these people that are being hired are police and fire. And his quote was, "That's not true. That is 100% not true. That is absolute 100% fallacy."
Right.
But your figures show that of the 600 hired since 2019, 500 are in public safety.
Yes, over 500, really.
And so how do you square that straight up denial from the CFO?
I just think it shows that there's a disconnect between what's happening on a state level and what's happening on a local level. Blaise Ngolia is coming to these cities and he doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know the dynamics of Jacksonville, the history of Jacksonville, what the state of our politics is like right now. And he comes in, he says, there's all this wasteful spending. Here's how you can fix it. And it's one of the main ways that we wouldn't fix it. That's not the way that City Council or the Deegan administration would go about fixing wasteful spending, so-called wasteful spending.
It did seem, too, that perhaps his target was a little scattershot. I mean, he came in and demanded 5 years' worth of data on the city. At the time he did that, Mayor Deegan had only been in office, about 2 years.
Right.
A couple months over 2 years. So the majority of that 5-year tenure would have been the Republican, her predecessor, Lenny Curry. And, the sort of scuttlebutt was that previous administration was none too thrilled to be getting sort of this criticism from a fellow Republican. And so it's not clear if that was just a incidental or if it was intentional.
Right. And again, I think just kind of the audits of going back 5 years is kind of just a way that they said it. They wanted to go back pre-COVID is what Ngolia said.
Okay.
But to kind of get a gauge of what numbers were before then. But again, it really just demonstrates a disconnect between what's actually going on in our city and what Blaise Ngolia and Florida Doge thinks is happening with our spending.
We've got a call from Alex in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Alex. Just very briefly, please.
Good morning. Yeah, I'll be very quick. I'd heard anecdotally that there was evidence that these property taxes could reduce rent for renters. Is there any facts or figures that this property tax will help people who are not homeowners?
And are you referring, Alex, to the state level proposal or the city's recent property tax?
The city proposal.
Okay, thanks. So the city proposal is relatively small. Is that right, Trinity?
Right. And it was a very insignificant property tax cut. And to answer your question, it does only apply to homeowners. It does not apply to renters.
Remind us what it kind of averages out to for the average homeowner.
Right. So, and it's less than $20 a year. And that was something that constituents were really upset about as well. Why do a property tax cut if it's not actually going to save anyone anything?
And so, but no plans to pass even a small portion of that along to renters as far as you know?
Yeah, not through my reporting thus far.
I just briefly want to say you are the former president of the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting. You actually interned here while you were a student at Howard University before joining the Washington Post as an audio intern. And now you're in the nonprofit newsroom of the Tributary, which now has rebranded as Florida Trib. Just tell us kind of the value of working in a nonprofit newsroom, why you chose to pursue that.
Yeah, I really think it's just journalism is a calling in general, but to be able to come back to my hometown and serve my community in this way is such a beautiful thing to me, especially through this model of nonprofit news. I think when you have these more for-profit news organizations that are owned by typically big, giant conglomerate media companies, it can be really hard, especially in today's age, to remain independent and to know that, funding is not going to affect the reporting that you do. And at the Florida Trib, we don't have that problem. And I'm really excited just to continue reporting and to do the great things here.
Well, we're glad to have you, Trinity Webster Bass. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, up next, now 6-time Grammy Award-winning singer Samara Joy. We talk about her meteoric rise to one of the greats in the genre. Welcome back. Well, she's been singing jazz for less than a decade, and she's already emerged as one of the strongest voices in the genre. She's won 5 Grammy Awards, including Best New Artist and twice for Best Jazz Vocal Album. She performs next month as part of the Fort Mose Jazz and Blues series, and we are delighted to be able to talk to her about it. Samara Joy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, people who aren't familiar with your story will be surprised, if not stunned, to learn that, you only began singing jazz at 18, but you do come from a musical family. Will you tell us a little bit about your grandparents?
Oh, my grandparents, Ruth and Elder Goldwire McClendon, started a group in Philadelphia called the Savettes of Philadelphia, and it was one of the premier gospel choirs of the 60s in Philly. They would travel all over Philly and sing at churches, and they recorded so many different albums. And so that's kind of the stock that I come from. And my dad and my aunts and uncles, they all sing. So I grew up with a lot of music in the house.
And so you sang with a choir in church, you performed, you were listening to R&B. What was it particularly that got you listening to jazz and loving jazz?
I was introduced to jazz in high school, in the latter part of high school. I think I was a junior or just about to be a senior. And I didn't really know much about it. And to be honest, I didn't immerse myself in it then. I learned 2 songs, 2 standards at that point. I think one was Route 66 and the other was a Duke Ellington song. And I utilized the Duke Ellington song to audition for a state school that I eventually got accepted into for the jazz study program. And that's when I started learning about jazz. I'm glad that I can say that now after I've already graduated and it's been a few years. But at the time, I didn't really know much about jazz, but I was willing to learn.
And these were, even though you had a background in music, you were kind of unfamiliar with the work of some of the greats, people like Sarah Vaughan or Ella Fitzgerald. These were fairly new voices to you, but you really immediately began to win accolades for your own performances, for your ability to kind of work with the jazz and create your own sound. Was it intimidating initially trying to cover some of these standards that are beloved and so well known by people?
Yeah, freshman year was very tough because it was sort of the phase of just, absorbing as much music as I could because I didn't really know how to sing in that style. I knew about gospel, I knew about R&B and soul, but I had no idea how to sing a song in sort of the jazz canon. And so freshman year was all just about internalizing the sound of the music and the style of musicians and vocalists who made it what it is. And so that was intimidating at first, but my sophomore year, everything sort of started to come together in my mind and in my sound. And I realized that, I enjoyed playing with musicians in this style. I enjoyed trying my best to interpret as they had done, while also sort of infusing each song with my own sense of creativity and individuality as they had done as well. Because the songs that initially started out on Broadway, it doesn't sound like it's a Broadway song necessarily when somebody like Sarah Vaughan or Ella or, Betty Carter sings it. So I wanted to have my own Samara way of singing standards, and I'm grateful to have had that time to prepare.
I think there's a lot of people who describe your voice as this, kind of just rich, full, silken sound, but I think there's really no way to describe it that does it justice. So I would like to listen to a little bit of a performance that you did for Austin City Limits a few months ago. This is a song off of your latest album, Portrait, and it is You Stepped Out of a Dream.
You stepped out of a cloud, and I want to take you away from the crowd and have you all to myself, alone and apart, out of a dream, safe in my heart, safe.
So a very different version of that Sarah Vaughan classic. How do you learn how to improvise like that, how to sort of weave your voice in and out with the other musicians that you're working with on stage? It seems like it would be an incredibly difficult task.
I think it's a balance of listening and of experiencing and practicing it. So if I had just sort of gone on stage and tried my best to maybe sound like a version of Sarah Vaughan, then I probably wouldn't be as successful. But the fact that I listened to the music, I listened to different versions, different interpretations, and then I played with people at jam sessions, on gigs, and with each night and with each gig, I always tried out something different, a different way of singing it, so that now I feel like I have a million ways that I can approach a song, versus maybe having a one-dimensional sort of distant interpretation of what it might sound like to sing jazz. Now I have sort of a foundation of how it could sound and the ways that I can also make it spontaneous and different.
And how do you choose a song if you want to cover it, so to speak? What are you looking for? What appeals to you?
I guess a song that speaks to me. I don't know. There are certain songs that have great lyrics, but maybe the melody is not one that inspires me. And some that have great melodies that I try to write lyrics to incorporate it into my material. But yeah, I guess I just look for a good foundation, and from there, anything's possible.
I sort of alluded in the intro to this meteoric rise that you've had. But just to run through some, I mean, you released your self-titled debut in 2021, your second album in 2023, and you won Grammys that year for Best Jazz Vocal Album, Best New Artist. You also won an NAACP Image Award last year, 2025. We're in 2026. And then 2 more Grammys for Best Jazz Vocal Album and Best Jazz Performance. It must be a little disorienting for all of that to be happening in such a short amount of time.
Yes, it can be. It can be very overwhelming. But I just, not to be cliche, I try to think about the music. That's what motivates me. That's what inspires me. The fact that not only do I feel confident in it, but I also feel like I have a lot to learn and a lot to develop in my music and in my interpretation. So if I just stay focused on the music and everything that I love about it and everything that I need to learn from it, then I guess the rest will follow.
I know that you lost your grandfather in December, and condolences about that. As you mentioned, he was a big part of your inspiration and your musical legacy and your family. And I saw some of the performance you did with the Boston Pops for the holidays, singing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." And I don't know, I don't want to impose that on you, but it did seem like there might be sort of more reflection and kind of emotion in that performance. I was just kind of wondering if that was informed by, that thought or his absence, since he just passed in December.
Yeah, the past couple of Christmases have been really special because we've been able to highlight him on stage in New York and Philly specifically. And so this Christmas, having to deal with, or having to see him deal with health issues so quickly, was a bit of a shock, and I was honestly not ready to deal with it, because when I called him, he turned 25. He turned 95 on September 23rd, and I called him like normal, and he sounded normal. And so just a couple months later, to find out that his heart is failing, and everything else as a result is failing, and you don't have much time left. I could not compute, and so yeah, that performance did have a little bit more sentimental weight, because I realized this might be the last one, and it was really hard to deal with. But I'm grateful for the time that I had with him. He was of sound mind until he turned 95. So I'm glad for the time that I had with him.
Yeah, that is a great thing. Your influence on a younger generation of musicians is something a lot of people have remarked on. You have a really big social media presence on TikTok and Instagram. You have 1 million followers, and you do a lot of regular postings. A lot of people think you're a kind of an ambassador for Generation X. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, but also given the fact that even in your own musical life, you kind of had a late introduction to jazz, sort of what the hurdles are there for exposing younger people to this kind of music.
I would say social media has been an incredible way to expose new audiences to this music they may not listen to. Like, you may not have ever heard of, like me, never heard of Sarah Vaughan, or you think of jazz as just being, black and white way back when. And so I'm glad to be able to expose them to the sound of it now, because it is a music and a genre that is very much alive and contributed to by many artists today. And so I guess sometimes the main hurdle is that not a lot of people like it, which is okay, because it's not necessarily acoustic music. I wouldn't say is the most popular right now anyway. Maybe it only was for a certain amount of time, but the people that do gravitate towards the music and that do like it, feel positively about it. So I guess my goal on using social media is not to get everybody to like it, but it's just to show them that it's there, and whoever gravitates towards it from there, then they learn something new.
And we mentioned Austin City Limits, which is in and of itself a storied stage to perform on, but you've also performed at Newport, Monterey, the Montreal Jazz Festival. You've performed at Carnegie Hall and the Apollo. Have those venues, have any of them been particularly memorable for you, special to step on those stages?
The most recent was Carnegie Hall, and that was a pretty incredible night. Carnegie Hall was incredible, not only because of how insane the room is, but also embarrassingly so, it was my first time in the room, my first time ever even being there, and it was to play a concert. So I've seen concerts online, of course, but I never experienced it for myself until that night. And the Apollo was special because I got to perform with my family. Oh, and another interesting tidbit, sorry. At Carnegie Hall, they used to hold the McDonald's Gospel Fest, and my family won the first year. And so I have pictures of them performing at Carnegie Hall too in the 90s, or maybe the late 80s, early 90s. So it's very full circle.
That's excellent. I don't know if you're very familiar with the stage that you're going to be performing on here in St. Augustine. This is, of course, the Fort Mose Jazz and Blues Fest, and there have been incredible artists that have performed and will be performing this year as well. But it is a stage that is held at the first legally sanctioned free black settlement in the United States. It's a history that has been resurgent here in recent years. They've rebuilt the fort that was the residence of this free black community. And so I think for local people here, it's got a special significance, and it is a really cool place to play. Do you have any thoughts about the venue that you're going to be performing at?
I'm once again embarrassed to say I didn't know that, but I look forward to diving even deeper into the history of this stage and this place. I've never been to St. Augustine before. So all I can say is I'm looking forward to the people there. I'm looking forward to sharing music that's both new and maybe treasured on the albums that I've released thus far. and I hope to make a good impression.
Well, I know that you will, and I'm sure it'll be an excellent performance. Samara Joy performs at the Fort Mose Jazz and Blues Series at Fort Mose State Park. The show is February 15th at 7 p.m. Samara Joy, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Scenic Jacksonville presents the Great Cities Symposium on February 5th. Victor Dover, city builder and town planner, shares how he has transformed cities, streets, and neighborhoods through urban design across the U.S. Tickets available at scenicjacksonville.org. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
Powerful force can be a negative one for sure, but I'm talking about one's personal sense of shame, that potent feeling which can keep our own behavior in check. So what happens when political leaders feel no sense of shame at all?
And certainly when we look at shamelessness in American politics, we are finding increasingly that there really is little cost to bad behavior.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11. Here on WJCT News 89.9.
A 2025 report found that 50 million Americans now have limited or no access to reliable local news. More than half of the country's major daily newspapers are now owned by just a handful of parent companies. What does it all mean for how news gets made and who gets heard, and who's trying to chart a new path forward? Our series, If You Can Keep It, returns next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Can HOA tensions lead to murder? The author of a new novel explores the politics of the gated community. Shelley Marsh is author of Dying to Live Here, and she joins us now. Good morning, Shelley.
Good morning.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.
So how did you choose tensions in an HOA as the subject of your mystery?
I guess you could say I lived it a bit. I served on my neighborhood's HOA for 2 years, and I was struck by how much emotion and conflict can collect in like ordinary places for sometimes very small issues. So that's what I got from that.
So you were able to mine some of those experiences. I'm guessing that some of it is ramped up or amped up in the telling.
Certainly. Yes, it's fiction.
But it is a book that has a lot of familiar touchstones for people who are reading it. It takes place in Costa Vedra, right?
Right.
It is
completely fictional
yes. Community off of A1A,
completely
Beach
fictional.
Boulevard. And, it kind of has these local things that are happening in St. Augustine, the little British pub that's there in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
north of the city. So there's all of these things that people will recognize. And I'm curious, how does that create fallout for you, or does it? I mean, you're writing about something.
We'll see.
We'll see. Okay. What kind of feedback have you gotten? Are people feeling that they're reflected in some way?
If someone sees themselves in it, that probably says more about them than about the book. But I tried, it's fictional, but it's based on situations and community dynamics that are real. But I blend with my fictional communities. I make things like sometimes I make up a marina, all right? It's not all like exactly about a certain place.
Sure.
But there are certainly some real places in there, like the pub on the way down to St. Augustine, which sadly closed. But,
Yeah. I think it's got a second life right now as something.
Yeah,
But
I haven't been there.
yeah, and so there are, as you say, I mean, there's kind of amplified or exaggerated
Right.
elements. And certainly one of them is the kind of the beginning of the book, which
Right.
starts with this discovery almost immediately of this very bloody body.
Mm.
But it's almost like a slapstick. This is not a
It's humor.
Yes, it is, and it is a funny book.
Yes.
Um,
I hope.
yeah. It also has some real social dynamics, though, as you say, and this kind of backbiting and pettiness that the homeowners association experiences, and that is kind of real, right?
Right. It's certainly amplified for humor and for the purposes of fiction. But yeah, it was fun to write. I was maybe creating fictional murders in my head when I was in those really long, boring meetings.
Thinking
So,
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you describe yourself, I mean, your own life, because part of this is built on these kind of estate sale that's happening and people who are nosy about their, neighbors' lives. And you cop to being somebody that snoops around at other people's houses at estate sales. So there is an element too there just from your own experience.
I'm just curious,
Uh-huh.
and then I have a storyteller brain that wants to like spin stories about it. So when I walk into an estate sale, my brain starts making up like, oh, maybe this person was like this, and I can see the things they collected when they traveled, and it's like a lens into someone's life, even
Yeah.
know the person.
Yeah. You can look at what they've collected and what they've gathered and sort of tell that story to yourself.
Right, and then I think about what will I leave behind? What do I want my life to be reflected in? And hopefully not. It's more people than things that you leave, obviously, but
Yeah.
it makes you think.
And so you've been a writer here in Northeast Florida for a while. You wrote for Void as a staff writer. You worked for the Florida Times Union, Shorelines, and the Ponte Vedra Recorder. And now you are vice president of the Northeast Florida chapter of Sisters in Crime. What is that?
Sisters in Crime exists to, it originally was addressing the imbalance in crime fiction that was primarily male writers. So we were there to lift up female writers in crime fiction. Now we're open to, all genders. So it's not exclusive, but exclusively sisters. We're siblings. But we promote local authors, and we also invite speakers to come in and provide information about research topics that might be useful in our books. So we've had cold case investigators come and forensic specialists and things like that.
And some of the reporting that you've done plays into the book in terms of, public records requests and what's available from the sheriff's office as these people who are trying to solve this murder, or maybe two, who are, getting public records and trying to do their own legwork.
Mm-hmm. My protagonist is she's kind of a tech whiz, so she uses her skills and internet research to help her dig up a lot of information.
Yeah. Well, it is a fun book. It is a good read. Shelley Marsh is the author of Dying to Live Here. Thanks so much for being here, Shelley.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you missed anything, you can find all of our past and current shows at firstcoastconnect.org. And while you're there, you can sign up to get our new daily newsletter. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett. Our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Our show is directed by Brady Corum, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when we meet the remarkable Russian dissident who was poisoned, imprisoned, and nonetheless won the Pulitzer Prize for his writing behind bars. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com. AARP Florida is on the lookout for volunteers ready to leverage their lifetime of experience to make a difference. Details at aarp.org/flvolunteer.